We didn't realise I wasn't quite as good as I thought I was then. I wanted to be good enough that I could go out on my own terms. I wasn't going to be a world champion overnight. Before I became a world champion, I needed to have a goal of being a New Zealand champion. My mother used to say to me, your children will be in your life, Susan, but don't give up your life with children. I wish someone had told me at your age to stop and think a little before you open your mouth. I hadn't lost my love for the game or anything. I think, had a dose of reality. I loved training as much as I loved competing. But I also loved competing and I also loved winning. It sort of broke me, but I wouldn't admit that at the time because it's a lonely thing. You know, you're standing up for everyone and then you look behind and you think, where is everyone? I'm doing this for you. Who's doing anything for me?
My name is Kaila Colbin. You're listening to my interview with Dame Susan Devoy, and this is the Hunger and Heart Podcast. Enjoy the show. Hello, my name is Kaila Colbin, and welcome to Hunger and Heart, a podcast on the intersection of wild ambition and fierce compassion. My guest today is Dame Susan Devoy. Dame Susan dominated international squash throughout the 1980s, holding the world #1 ranking for nearly a decade, winning 4 world championship titles and 8 British Opens, an unmatched record in New Zealand squash. Her achievements were recognized with numerous honors, and following her retirement, she moved into leadership and service, including time with the Halberg Trust and from 2013 to 2018 as New Zealand's Race Relations Commissioner. In this conversation, we talk about heading overseas to become a world champion at just 17 years old. We talk about the way her parents guided her to become both fiercely independent and wildly ambitious. And we talk about what she now sees differently in hindsight. So here you are, my conversation with Dame Susan Devoy. So I've done a little bit of research about you. And one of the things that I read that you said was I saw that you described yourself as a chip off the old block from your mom. So I thought maybe we could start. Could you tell me about your mom?
Yeah, my mother's been dead for a very long time, over a quarter of a century now. So I'm the youngest of 7 children. So she was 40 when I came along, you know. And I suppose I only really identified myself as being very much like her when I actually wrote my book a couple of years ago. She was bold and fearless. I mean, she was a woman. You know, my mum worked incredibly hard. I mean, so did my dad, but my mother was the driving force in our family. We had 7 children. You know, I remember that she used to work the night as the night porter at a local hotel, and she went to work for my daddy's accounting business. She never became an accountant, but she was as good as. She'd come home and cook dinner for everyone and get us all sorted. But I also thought, and she was always very opinionated, you know, which embarrassed the hell out of me. So, you know, and I'm also very opinionated and I embarrass the hell out of my children. So, but, you know, I admire that now. I really do. Of course, as a young person, you don't want to see your mother being in the spotlight. And I know my children don't necessarily appreciate my views on some matters, but yeah, I mean, in that way, I was a chip off their block. We were different in some ways too, but, you know, dedicated to our family. I think, you know, I was just so much luckier than my mother. My mother used to say to me, your children will be your life, Susan, but don't give up your life with children. And I think she basically gave up her life to children because she had no option. You know, she couldn't do the things that I've had the privilege of doing. And look, she had 7 children, not because she wanted 7 children, but because she was a Catholic and it just happened. She used to say, I'm lucky I didn't have 17, you know? So yeah, she worked extraordinarily hard. She had a tough life, you know, but she got a lot of joy out of all of her kids and especially, you know, me is what I did. And look, when my dad died, she sort of curled up her toes and, you know, she had a lot to live for, but she didn't see it like that. She was a bit bitter and tested. And I felt in the last years I was a bit cross with her really for, you know, sort of giving up in some ways. At a time when I had 4 young sons, I really needed a mother, and she was, she used to say, "I've got nearly 20 grandchildren. I'm not here to look after yours," I get that now, but at the time, so yeah, I'm extraordinary like her. Yeah, I'm probably not as bold as she was actually, but yeah, I got a lot of good traits in her, and I appreciate that now.
I have an observation, which is that the kind of children we want are often the most difficult kind of children to have. Like we want children who are opinionated and who are thoughtful and who are bold and who are, independent and who are, don't just say yes for the sake of it and who are willing to question things, et cetera, except when there are children, in which case, can you please just shut up and go to bed because I said so? And what you just described about your mother has prompted for me curiosity about maybe the same holds true the other way around. Like these parents who are absolutely the most extraordinary parents because they open us up to possibilities that so many people never have access to. And at the same time, they're challenging because you're like, oh my, like my mother was she was a pioneer in whole foods cooking. And she used to make me for lunch, she would make me brown rice balls wrapped in seaweed with like pickled plum paste, Japanese pickled plum paste. And I was mortified. I hated it. And I was always just like, can I not just have peanut butter and jelly on white bread like everybody else? But of course, today I wouldn't give that up for the world. Right. These things that are like the difficult things about our parents are precisely the things that end up making us who we are.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that generation weren't so, I mean, they were so busy. They weren't so vested. I mean, I never had any deep and meaningful conversations with my mother. I didn't get my period till I was 21, and that concerned me a little bit. People said that's not normal. And my mother said, "Oh, just be grateful you haven't got one." She was that
Mhm.
sort of, there was no, and I look how much I've been a helicopter parent to my children, and you know, I know that's how I became so resilient because I was the youngest. After my brother was 20 years older than me. By the time I came around, I think my mother had really quite had enough of raising children. Although she was delighted had to have a girl. But we didn't quite bring ourselves up. But I walked to school since I was 5, and I would stay at home on my own often, or my brothers would sneak out. They're supposed to look after me, but they were never there. We got ourselves to places. We didn't rely on our parents being there. I really did. I sort of became, sort of the, I don't know, uh, the cook, cleaner, and bottle washer in the absence of my mother because she finally realized after doing that for so many years that she was going to go out and have a bit of a social life.
Good
Um,
honor.
yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, I mean, she was a different mother to me than she was to my brothers, not in any bad way, but yeah, I just, there's so much admiration for women of that generation that, I mean, when they talk about children going to daycare, I can't remember anything else, I mean, it was just, but I think that's what, made me very extraordinarily resilient. And also very social because she loved being, both my parents were extraordinarily social. Our house was, just full of people all the time, and everyone was welcome and always, looked after, and the hospitality was amazing because they loved people and they loved being out, and and they love parties, and I've also got that sort of sort of streak in me too. So yeah, I mean, you are a product of your upbringing, I think, in many ways. Yeah, so yeah, it's just it's just a shame she's not around now to see the product of her hard work.
I'm sure she would have been extremely proud of you. I heard you say just slightly earlier on that you were kind of cross with her in those, final years. Like, come on, give me a hand with my grandchildren. Do you feel that you were able to like heal your relationship with her before she passed, or is that something that happened like after she passed? Like your connection and gratitude for her?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I lived in Auckland at the time, and when my dad died, and come and live with us, it was very welcome and open invitation. I never knew she would. I think, the sad thing about my mother is that when I retired from playing squash, a part of her died because she loved the attention with that. She
Mhm.
loved walking in the supermarket and everyone stopping her and saying, "Oh, how's Susan getting on? And gosh, she's done well, isn't she?" And all of that. And then I retired, and I think she thought I was mad having 4 children, sort of. And I mean, she loved her grandchildren to bits, but she just didn't. She wasn't one of those grandmothers that was going to dote on them, and whatever. And I understood that. I completely understood that. Because she was, completely worn out, I think. But there were other ways that she could really have enjoyed, and she had lots of them, and they were olders and whatever. But yeah, I mean, my dad died. He retired at 70, got cancer, had a stroke, got cancer. She had to look after him. She was a devout Catholic. She never went to church again once he died. She gave God the big finger and and lost just a reason to live. And that was incredibly sad because that didn't have to be like that. But despite how much we tried and whatever, yeah, she was sort of just withered away, really. So she died in 2000, 26 years ago.
Mm. How long had they been together?
Oh, they were about to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. My dad died just a little way before that.
Mm.
Funny enough, I found out that when my father died, I realized that they're coming up to their 50th, and my dad died 32 years ago. Uh, I realized that my brother was already 50. So I thought, that's interesting. And a whole lot of those sort of stories came out actually. So
Ah, bit of a shotgun.
yeah, 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 yeah. So anyway,
I like please believe me, I did not intend for this podcast to be entirely about your mother, but there was another thing that I read that I found fascinating because in your description of her that you've just shared, I've formed a mental picture of someone who reminds me quite a lot of my own mother. Like this, just I'm a no nonsense. I'm going to get things done. Like we're not going to cry about it. We're not going to I'm not fine if you want to cry, but I'm not going to make a big deal out of it. I'm just going to like get the job. You're not getting your period. Who cares? Whatever. But didn't she also, when you first went to compete in Europe, didn't she do something like a behind the scenes thing to
yeah,
support
yeah.
you? And what'd she
My,
do?
my brothers, my brothers all got together and bought her a ticket because I was extraordinarily homesick and struggling in my first years. Most people do actually. Uh,
How old
so
were you?
uh, I was, I think I just turned 18.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
So she, I went to Europe on my own and mostly England and sort of couch surfed and found my way around. And my memory's not so clear, but my brothers got a ticket together, paid for a ticket and sent her over, but I never saw her. She was sort of like the supposed safety net.
Mm.
My brother lived in France and she went to stay with him for a period, but she also did come to England. But, she didn't sort of hang out with me or be around. It was just like, well, we'll let her sink or swim, but if she's drowning, I'm here. That sort of
Mm.
thing. But yeah, I mean, it was, I don't know, was that supposed to be character building? I don't know. It was all a bit, I mean, it's hard, yeah, it's very hard to believe actually.
Mm. I thought I read that story and I found it remarkably touching. Like this, because one of the hardest things as a parent is to let children fail, to let children go and actually experiment on their own, to actually try things on their own, to actually do it by themselves, for themselves, with the accompanying possibility of failure. And to be there and go, I'm not going to let her fully drown. I'll be close enough that if she's fully going to drown, there's something I can do, but I'm going to give her that space. Like I found that really touching.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if anything in our family, it was my father who was sort of the softy,
Yeah.
the sort of emotional one. I mean, he wrote all these love letters which he went away, but he never sent them because,
Mm.
it just, he never got around to it. But yeah, he was always, and she was always the practical. I mean, she just always had to run the family and do whatever it was, but useless in the nicest possible way. But yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, I don't know if that was if the roles if my children had got. I would never do that to my children. I couldn't help but interfere. You know what I mean? I'd be there, like, so yeah, I think it's just, yeah, giving me a lot of rope. And as I said, hoping that I wouldn't drown. And I
Mm.
didn't.
Clearly not. So you mentioned about not getting your period until you're 21. You started sport from a very young age. Can you tell me a little bit about your squash journey?
Well, as I mentioned, I'm the youngest of seven, and the first squash courts opened up in Rosebrua more like a million it was. Um, but it's my earliest memories is my brothers were all very sporty, of course, played lots of different things, and they played a lot of tennis. And one day it was raining, and the new squash courts had opened up, and they went along. And it was owned by a very famous squash family, the Brownlees, and they just all got hooked, including my parents. I mean, my parents played occasionally, not very often. I can't really remember my mother being sporty, but apparently she did play. Um, and I just spent most of my life there. And then my brothers would play in tournaments, and my parents some of my brothers had left home by the time I came around. And of course, we wouldn't all fit in the car, but particularly my youngest three brothers would often play tournaments in the weekends, and I would just have to go along. And, squash is pretty social. And so when my brothers had finished playing in the tournament on Friday and Saturday night, my parents and them would generally be in the bar till all hours, seeing that the squash was sort of a sideline to the drinking and socialising at the squash clubs. And so I just used to go on the squash courts and hit balls to fill in time mostly and to keep myself occupied from a very young age. And I just got hooked too. I think, I started playing my first tournaments when I was around 9 and, basically when kids were allowed to play in tournaments. Before that, they weren't. And yeah, I just was hooked from a very, very, very young age. And I think everyone thought that, that young girl, the boy, the last thing she'd ever want to do in her life would, play squash, must be sick to death of it. But, it was quite the opposite. And yeah, and, I would go there every day after school from as long as I can remember. I mean, it was also a big crowd of us that did it. It was very popular, and so it was the place to hang out with all your mates, and, and parents loved it. It was a fantastic family atmosphere, and, we all got into it, and it became the centerpiece of our lives, actually. And, you know, not just mine, my brothers, particularly my younger brothers and my parents, and there was seldom a weekend, particularly in the winter months, that we went at either at some squash tournament or at the squash club.
What prompted I mean, you were 17, almost 18, I guess, when you took off to Europe. That's a pretty big move. Can you tell me about the catalyst for that?
Yeah, I went to an all girls Catholic school. I didn't particularly like school. I was okay. I was pretty, I was relatively smart and didn't find school that difficult. And in the last year of high school, I made the New Zealand senior team and went to Canada. So that was my first. I'd been to Australia when I was sort of 15 or so. It was my first overseas trip, but I've never been to, on a big trip like that. We went to Toronto. And I played in the seniors, but I also played in my first World Juniors. And, my eyes were out on stalks. I thought, wow, this is cool, staying in a flash hotel and seeing these people I really admired play, world champions. And there were girls that were really good that were sort of, my age or a little bit older, but seemed to be making it on the senior circuit. And, I loved playing squash. I always think I was pretty good because I loved training as much as I loved competing. But I also loved competing and I also loved winning. And I came back and went back to school and carried on as normal. And then one day I had to run in with one of the nuns that taught me. She said, "Susan, do you hadn't done my assignment?" And she said, "Well, would you rather be at school playing a squash?" And I thought, what a ridiculous question. And so I just packed up and left. Unfortunately, I hadn't told my parents and I was too scared to. So for about 3 weeks, I used to get dressed in my school uniform, hide under the house till they'd gone to work. So they both worked together and they would leave, about 8 o'clock. Because my father was, I mean, a female professional squash player was virtually unheard of in those days, completely nuts stuff. And I think he always thought that I would go to university. I was clever enough to. And if I didn't go to university, then I'd get a job in the bank or, go nursing or something like that, what everyone did. So, when I finally plucked up the courage to tell them, I found myself a job as a builder's labourer on a working site in Rotorua. A friend of mine's father was the foreman, and I said to them, I've left school, I want to go to England, and I've got a job. I'm going to save up enough money financially, I'll be gone by the end of the year. And yeah, they were well, they weren't overly horrified. My father was a bit disappointed, but, they never worse commend them now for thinking, yeah, well, go for it, they said.
Was your father more disappointed that you wanted to be a female professional? I mean, you're obviously a female anyway, but that you wanted to be a professional squash player? Or was he more disappointed that you'd lied to him for 3 weeks and pretended to be going to school?
Oh, I don't think he worried too much about either of those. I think he was just scared for me that, my choice was not necessarily going to work out.
Mm,
And what would I have to fall back on? That was
mm.
really uh, what it was. Yeah, no, I mean, they didn't have a lot of money, so I had to work. They scraped together what they could to help me. I got some support from all around. I just think they thought it was a big move, but look, they thought I mean, I thought I was pretty good. They thought I was pretty good too. We didn't realize I wasn't quite as good as I thought I was then, but
Tell me
yes.
about that. Tell me about that. Like, so you go to Europe and then you're kind of, I guess the mental jump I'm making, and please bear in mind, it's hard to overstate the scale of my ignorance when it comes to squash. So feel
Oh,
free to like put me in my place with anything I say. So I'm making a total guess, which might be completely wrong, that you go to Europe and it's kind of like a new environment, a new way of playing, a new that you're getting pushed in new ways. Like, what was that kind of confrontation like?
well, I'd done okay in the World Juniors, and I've done okay in the World Seniors, nothing spectacular, but I thought, I was immediately going to be. So, you as a young person, you go over and I based myself in the UK, but I was in Europe most weekends playing tournaments. And, for the first, I wasn't seeded. I didn't, wasn't any good. So I played the number one seed, I think, for the first six tournaments in a row, got soundly thrashed, really quite enough to sort of, make someone give up, really. If you're not winning, you go to the tournament. If you don't win, you don't get to stay in the hotel, or you can get billeted, you're out. So you've got to find some accommodation and somewhere to live, get to the next tournament, or, the next week later, it's Geneva or Lyon or, Frankfurt or whatever. I mean, here's a young girl that's from Rotorua in New Zealand that thought that catching the plane from Heathrow to Auckland was a bit like, from Auckland to Heathrow was a bit like catching the bus from Auckland to Rotorua. That would be fine. Um, so yeah, and I realized that I had this grandiose idea that I was going to be a world champion. I just hadn't actually sat down and thought about how I was actually going to get there. I mean, I didn't really have much of a plan. I just perhaps had this aspirational goal of being the best, and it was just going to happen because I trained hard and I wanted it. But I hadn't really had a plan, and I didn't have anyone to help me. That was the thing. I was doing it all on my own. I mean, my brother had helped me a lot, and he was coaching me and advising me and whatever. But he'd never done this, and everyone else seemed to have a coach. And I was just. I mean, God, this is a long time ago. This is 42 years ago. We didn't have the advantage of sports science or anything that they have today, sports psychology. I mean, if you went to a psychologist, people thought you were really nuts. So yeah, it was relatively depressing, I suppose. I used to say to myself, well, if I'm going to lose again, I'm at least going to see how many more points I can get this time. So I never gave up trying, and it was just the good fortune for me was I was playing in the British Open. The British Open is our penultimate. I mean, it's our Wimbledon, I suppose, but, not quite on the same level. Unfortunately, Bruce Brownlee got a serious injury and had to retire. So they were sort of a bit of a loose end, and they were at the British Open, and they knew my families and, the history of our family in squash. And she said to Bryce, you should go and watch that young girl play down there. She's that young Devoy girl, with her, she's quite good. And he said, and so that was it. They came up to me and they knew I'd had a bit of a torrid time, and they said, "Did I want a base?" Boss was, happy to coach me, and so if I came back to the UK the year after, I would have A, somewhere to live, and B, someone to coach me, and there was a bit of a team of people around there. So I think that was really the turning point for me. Was suddenly I had a coach, a full time coach. I had this partner was like having, someone to, care for me and look after me. It wasn't all, my own doing, and an environment that sort of was a culture of excellence to start. I mean, there was never any doubt that I had every ounce of determination and drive to do it. I just needed the right direction and the right coaching.
It really is like a movie. Like, you go over there and you've got all the big dreams, and immediately you fall flat on your face. And I heard you say that you would say to yourself, "Well, I'm just gonna see how many points I can get next time if I don't win." Did you ever doubt? Did you ever doubt whether the pursuing the dream was the right path?
I think there were times there where I got incredibly homesick, and at times it seemed like nothing was going right and everything was going wrong. And had I made the right choice, but I'd also seen other people do that before. Like a lot of people go for the first time. From New Zealand. Let's face it, we are geographically isolated. So to go, you've got to really. It's not like you can just pop home for the weekend if things don't go well. We didn't have things that we have today. We didn't have FaceTime or, I wasn't allowed to make phone calls because it was too expensive and all that sort of thing. But there were so many people who'd done it and had never gone back because it was too hard. Or, and I mean, I thought about it for a while, but I think when I went back home after my first season and I knew that I had somewhere to go to and some people to go to, that, it was too good an opportunity to turn down. And, I hadn't lost my love for the game or anything. I think, had a dose of reality and realized that, my goals weren't, before I became a world champion, I needed to have a goal of being a New Zealand champion. And I needed to have little incremental goals that were achievable, which sounds very cliche, but so that I could see my progress and think that, um, I wasn't going to be a world champion overnight, which is what I originally thought that I was going to be the next greatest thing on planet Earth.
I mean, what I hear is you still thought you would do that, but then there was like, "Oh, there has to be a path from here to there, and I have to kind of get a bit of an understanding what that path was." Sounds like we owe a lot to Bryce, and sorry, forgive me, was it his wife who spotted you?
Right. It was his partner.
Marie. Sounds like we owe a debt of gratitude to Bryce and Marie for welcoming you in and being
Yeah.
that catalyst to go, "Actually, you know what? We'll give you some support here."
Yeah. I mean, it was an unusual relationship. I mean, they didn't stay together long after that. So it was, a little awkward and stuff. But, um, Bryce was really a devil's advocate. Marie was sort of, kept the home fires burning and did the sort of buttering up, not buttering up, but, stroked your ego, made you feel better, picked you up when you had a bad loss and did all those things. Bryce was just, a hard ass and he was a devil's advocate. So, I was a pretty precocious young person back then. And, it was sort of my way or the highway. And he put me in my place a number of times. Um, which, in hindsight, I realized was the right thing to do. If I was playing and a bit mouthy, he'd come down and tell me to shut my mouth or he'd rip my tongue out of my effing head. Or, if you don't do that, I will, not coach you again. And I mean, just grounding things, because you can't change your personality.
Mm,
You can change your behaviors and your attitudes and all that. You can never change well, I don't think you can change your personality.
mhm.
I mean, and mine was always this feisty, fighting, go get it, like loud, not loud, but,
Forward.
forward, direct. And, I sometimes, I've got a son and two sons actually, a little similar to myself and two that aren't, thankfully. But I always say to them, I wish someone had told me at your age that to stop and think a little before you open your mouth or you choose to do something. Um, and I learned that the hard way, really. It took me a long time, actually. It didn't even happen very quickly. It took me a very long. It probably took me till I was 55 or 56.
Was there a moment?
uh, yeah. Actually, it probably, yeah, no, no. Um, There were a number of moments, actually, a number of moments.
Any you'd be willing to share?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's, I had a fantastic sporting career. My husband had a very unfortunate business failure, which wasn't his fault, it was his partner's, but, our future was sort of taken from us. Um, some very bad business dealings, his business went under, and, my whole life changed. I suddenly went from having been a retired world champion to having four sons under 5 years and being involved in a whole lot of charity stuff and things that I love doing and sort of, lots of self-learning on governance and boards but, being able to be at home for my children and living the life of Riley, really. Um, and that's how I thought life would be. And then when this happened, he was my husband without, his business went into receivership, and here he was without a job. He was, I was in my 30s and he was in his 40s, and we, it, it was catastrophic, really. And even more difficult because it was through no fault of our own, even though hindsight, you can see some red flags and whatever now, but it didn't help at the time. And then, it was, for him, it was a pride thing, well, not a pride thing. It was, I've got 4 young children here and a wife and family that are depending on me, and, what am I going to do? And so to his credit, he just did anything in the meantime until, you know, gathered himself together. But in the meantime, I got offered a job. I've never been for a job interview in my life. I've never even had a real job, I never thought playing professional sport a real job. I just said that was a real pleasure. And we moved to Tauranga, and I became the CEO of Sport Bay of Plenty. Cut a very long story short, I did that for a few years. And not long after we got there, he got this opportunity to set up a business. He's a, sales is his thing. He set up an orthopedic company for an Italian company. And honestly, he's doing it to this day. He's supposed to be retired, but they call him out all the time. So, I'm incredibly proud of the fact that we rebuilt our lives, and our personal wealth. And, there's no denying we put on our bums very, very, very firmly. And it was awful. It was absolutely awful. But then that all was successful. And then I was able to stop working and stay at home with the kids. And that's the thing about, when my mother said about giving up your life and your children. I kept getting offers of doing different things, I'm still involved in lots and lots of things, mostly voluntary. And I got this call to apply for the role of race relations commissioner. And that's, we still had one at high school. We're two actually. Two had left home and two at high school, and I took that job. And it's a very long-winded story. Just do you want to hear it?
I have so many questions about your time as race relations commissioner. So
Yeah.
please keep going.
So, it was awful. I mean, when I
Being
started,
race relations commissioner was awful.
no, getting the job was, I was, according to, I knew that the whole world wouldn't be overly whelmed with my appointment, that it would be unusual. Firstly, I was the first woman. Secondly, I was white. And, I was appointed under the national government. And if you're appointed under any government, then people naturally think that you're, a National Party patsy or anything like that. And it must have been a very slow news day, week, month, or whatever, but I became a target of some very highly critical, people very critical of my appointment. And so it was really difficult to sort of be able to actually get my feet under the table and actually do my job, because I had opposition from even within the Human Rights Commission. People didn't even like me in there or did give me a chance or whatever. So
Can I ask at this point, because I do want to hear the totality of the story. The people who hired you obviously saw some stuff in your experience and your background. What did they see that they were like, she's the right woman for the job?
well, I think it's an interesting process. I wouldn't say that. So, I got a call from the Minister of Justice saying that I got a call from the CEO of the Ministry of Justice to say that the Minister of Justice, ironically, which is Judith Collins, who's just resigned today, to say
Oh,
that
did
I
she?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Well, she's not resigned today. She's not standing in the next room.
Right. I missed that news item. Okay. Good.
Yeah,
Good to know.
yeah. So, she asked him to ring me to see if I'd apply, and so I, got the relevant information from him. I'm not so sort of pompous that I think, oh, yes, I could do that. Or I can do anything, whatever. But look, I'd worked in the disability space for a long, long time. I not being, the ideal choice. I looked at the job description and I thought, yep, 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 yep. Yes, no, 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 yes, no. Ticked enough boxes to say yes. And I had a very, very, very close, no, a very close friend of mine who's a mentor and to help me in lots of ways, especially in, when I started working. And I rang her and she said, Susan, just be careful. That job's not for the faint-hearted. And I said, well, it's lucky I'm not faint-hearted, is it? um, and so I went for interviews. I went for 2 interviews with panels, actually. Some pretty well-known people have interviewed me on a whole raft of things. So, it wasn't like Julia said, oh, well, we're getting to the end of the line, really. No one else wants to do it, and who are we going to get? And that's what it felt like to the general public, I think. Someone had leaked it to the media that I'd been there. And, um, so rather than have, a sort of, I don't know what you'd call it, a proper announcement or a, considered approach to the announcement that this is what Susan brings to the table, and I was just left. So, and it got announced, and the next day I had staff arriving at my house to sort of, it was always, I started off in damage control.
Mm.
And that
How
was,
did you navigate that?
um, uh, I just, one of the things I've never done in my life is to read anything about me, good,
Smart.
bad, good, bad, or indifferent, and I
Smart.
didn't go on social media. I mean, I do go on social media, but I don't read anything about myself. And, that happened when I was in my early 20s and I got very aggrieved by something that was written by the British tabloids about me. It was entirely untrue. And I went for it, I went for it and realized, you can't take on the fourth estate or whatever it is and win, or what you do is just make people more into you, you're like stirring now. So I decided from then on that I was never going to, and look, it's not like, I don't have people around me that can give me what the state of the nation is or what are the public thinking or, particularly in a job that I had, you needed that. And you sometimes did all of the good stuff too, like, but someone would say to me and whatever. And I realized, way back then, and particularly the advent of social media, I can't control what people think about me. I had no control over that. They don't know me. And then this is the hard thing about being a public figure is that everyone has this perception of who you are. You're either an ice maiden or you're a callous or and whatever you do, you're not. And I always say that to my kids, you can't make people, you can't change their opinion about you. And you can't, it's their problem, not yours. You can't control it. So that's how I went through that. I just, pretended it wasn't, well, I still had kids at home. I needed to they need to see that their mother was okay.
Mhm.
Behind the scenes, I might have been, sort of falling to bits, but I wasn't going to let anyone else see that. And that wasn't going to be very helpful. Um, so yeah, I mean, and it was a good test because, there were a few occasions, uh, not a lot, but there were a few where it got pretty testy in the commission and, I became, to challenge some people on certain things and, that's the job of the commissioner is to hold people to account. So you can't be a sort of, wilting, uh, wallflower if you can't do that. So, and
That
because of
was
that,
actually okay. So that was actually going to be my next question, and it's a really ignorant one, but one I don't want to assume I know the answer to. What does the race relations commissioner do? What's the job?
well, funny, if you asked the average Joe Bloggs what they thought the job was, I think the average New Zealander might say that we're the judge, jury, and adjudicator of anyone or anything that is supposedly racist. So, it's like a public figure has a brain fade and says something in, on the radio or on television or on newspapers or whatever, then, the race relationship comes out and, wags their big stick and says, yes, But it's not that at all. What it is basically I worked for the New Zealand Human Rights Commission, and my responsibility was to ensure that our government was upholding their obligations to United Nations, which is around the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And so, basically there's that side of as a monitoring to see how we're tracking as a country in regards to, our bicultural obligations and the fact that we live in a multicultural society. And that was the problem, I think. Well, not that was the problem, it is the problem, is that, we've got, and look what's happened in the last few years, which is, where it's ugly feathers all the unnecessary, revisiting of our basic principles in our founding documents. Thank goodness I'm not the Race Relations Commissioner. But on the sort of
You'd be speaking up.
on the front-facing side of what the people see, is my job is to hold people to account. But, that's what it is. And things that happen, people that are racially abused on buses or, yesterday was in Wellington here was Holocaust Remembrance Day. Basically it's really not aligning actually, it's not the word, it's supporting our vulnerable and our minority communities who are basically exposed to racism and racist behaviours on a very, very, very regular basis. And it's asking people and encouraging people, or telling people actually, to stop being bystanders and to start being upstanders. So, yeah, it's a complex job. But God, it enriched my life in so many ways. It was just, overwhelming, really. But towards the end, there was a bit of friction. Well, there wasn't a bit of friction. There was a lot of friction internally between commissioners and CEOs and particularly the Race Relations Commissioner. And there was an incident where there was there was a sexual harassment complaint by a staff member who, accused another staff member, and it got sort of swept under the carpet, or not swept under the carpet. It was supposedly handled internally but nobody knew that. And I got embroiled in that. And staff used to come to me, I think, because they knew I'd do the right thing, or at least I'd do something. And I challenged the manner in which it was held, and it all blew up to this huge internal combustion about processes and people, and and I genuinely believe that anyone that works in the New Zealand Human Rights Commission should be beyond the approach. We are the New Zealand Human Rights Commission.
Yeah.
Cake,
Right there in the title.
Yeah, and it was interesting. It wasn't interesting. I was the whistleblower,
Mm.
and as a result of the whistleblower, the government then took it upon themselves to have an independent review. And, the outcome of that review, I thought she would do a fantastic job, and in some ways she did. But, in the end, came out, and I don't think she quite got it right, but that's okay. And she said that the Race Relations Commissioner was a disruptor.
Mm.
And I thought, I'll take that as a compliment, actually. There was a change of government. Perhaps I could have stayed on, but, didn't see myself as part of the solution. I didn't see myself as part of the problem, but I certainly didn't see, and I'd made my mark. And it really, I didn't realise at the time, but, it changed. The CEO left and the Chief Commissioner left and others, and it sort of, there was a swept the place clean, and people come up to me now that work there and say, people say that you were very brave and courageous. But, I would say and add to that, there's always a price to pay for being a whistleblower.
Mhm.
And what I always have learnt, and this is what I've learnt, took me a long time, is it's a huge price to pay. It's usually a very personal sacrifice, and and I always think, I always do things for the right reason. Did I necessarily do them the right way? And I think that's where I talk about the self-reflection of how I handle things. It was I mean, I'm emotional, I wear my heart on my sleeve. I get louder and I get angry and I get frustrated. And, I've learnt and taught myself and had some, sort of supervision and stuff to understand that uh, it doesn't necessarily get the desired outcome. It's being able to control that passion and emotion in a way that doesn't make people feel threatened, like, I mean, it's not like I was banging the table and saying, well, I just used to get so frustrated. And then part of me is that's part of my strength, but it's also my weakness.
Isn't that
So
always the way though? Because
yeah,
these things, when I first heard you say that this forward nature of yours, it took you a long time to kind of come to grips with it and to learn how to navigate it. And what came to mind for me was that is the same part of you that drives you to be a champion. That's the same part of you that drives you to go for the role in the first place. The same part of you that is the part of you that's able to hold power to account. And there's every advantage has its dark side, right? And so that dark side of like, when is it you cannot do, I imagine, you cannot do the job of race relations commissioner without making people feel uncomfortable. There's no way. And so the question is less like, how do I do this in a way that doesn't make people feel uncomfortable? More like, how do I do this in a way that's most effective, for the outcome that we're going for?
yeah. I mean, in the end of the day, you've got to stop thinking about yourself and thinking about the people you're advocating on. It's quite easy to wallow in self pity and think, that uh, but it's not till a little later. I mean, it sort of broke me, but I wouldn't admit that at the time, But I realised afterwards that it affected me. I mean, like, the stress was just sort of bubbling like little geysers in water, and then it just went. "Woo." Um, and when I
How'd
look
you come
back,
back from it?
I took some time out. My husband was sick, went did a job in Melbourne for a while, so it was good. I went over to Yellow Sugar Anonymous. It took a long time actually.
Did you do
Um,
anything in particular? Did you go for walks? Did you have counseling? Did you journal? Did you did you have any
I drank
techniques?
lots of wine.
Okay.
And then I got some counselling, and that was really, really
Uh-huh.
good. But,
Mhm.
you know, and I suppose when I was asked, I said to myself, I'm never going to do anything in the public eye again. I'm not going to do anything. I'm not never going to do any public speaking. I'm never going to do anything. I'm just, that's it. I thought I was burnt out, but I think I was, I wondered within my reputation and what do people think? No one said anything because it's a lonely thing. You're standing up for everyone. And then you look behind and you think, where is everyone? I'm doing this for you. Who's doing anything for me? Nobody. And that was like the fight for equal prize money. It took me right back to, we'd always sitting in the change room saying, we're all going to go out there. We're all going to go out there and demand that we get some more money because it's not fair. Men are getting 10 times more than us and they're not getting anything. Yeah, 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 yeah. And I'd walk out and I'd be the only one. And they'd be thinking like, oh, she's the number one and she's sort of got the sway and whatever. And, because so it becomes incredibly lonely that you, you have this sort of, uh, you're just looking for a bit of support, and then if you don't get the support, you start to question yourself and think, well, am I right? Yeah. Am I doing the right thing? Is this, but, I came right, and I think, it's a really strange thing to say, but, I became a bit not a recluse, but I didn't do anything and whatever. And then I got the call to go on Celebrity Treasure Island, and
Mhm.
I immediately said no, and then, my husband said, "Oh, you might want to think about this." So, but I did that, and that helped me get my mojo back.
Really?
Yeah, because if you make a big prize dick of yourself on primetime television, uh, there's no going back from that, and it made me realise I am just who I am.
Mm.
And actually, people can not everybody's cup of tea. People can take it or leave it because, morally, ethically, I'm a good person. Of sound character and sound mind. And, I am, as I said, you can't change your personality.
I heard you just say that there was a huge price to pay as a whistleblower. I heard you say now knowing what you know about yourself and how you show up and the way that you achieve the things you're wanting to achieve, maybe you would have done things a bit differently. Do you feel today that the price was worth it?
Um, yeah, yeah, I do. I mean, I can, I know in my, uh, with my hand on my heart, I know that I did some pretty formidable things in there, which, not everybody knows about, and I don't need to tell everyone about them, but that just not myself, just not just me, but our team were responsible for, the Royal Commission and Inquiry to Historic State Abuse, our first racism campaign, clearing out the commission and making sure that, that culture and those behaviours didn't continue and things like that. So, yeah, um, yeah, I'm pretty proud of those achievements. I think just when you're caught in the maelstrom of all of it happening, you forget about what you've actually achieved. And, it's a bit like playing sport. I retired young. I retired at 28. Oh, help me. If someone had said to me, you're going to have 4 sons in 5 years, Susan, I would have kept playing for at least another couple of years and only had two. But that's not true because, see, I got caught up in that. I didn't enjoy it anymore. Winning gave me no joy. I win a British Open, so what? I've already run 7 of them. And it was only took that in 1991, my dad had a stroke. I got pregnant. I didn't know I was pregnant until the last minute. I mean, I've been married for years and years. It was just weird. And then I had a miscarriage on the same day my father had a massive stroke. And that all of those things just gave me the time to think about it. And I realized that, I was going to go back and have one more year of playing squash, just one. And I had some unfinished business, not that I hadn't achieved all I wanted to do and, in terms of winning things, but I was I wanted to be good enough that I could go out on my own terms and I wanted to go out as the on top and being the very best, And I got to do that again. And, I think back in hindsight, the luckiest thing that happened to me was John's business going under because it gave me the chance to reinvent myself. And I am the mother of reinvention. I can honestly tell you that I am always, for some, my only regret in life is that I don't have some sort of tertiary education so I can tell everyone I went to university or whatever. But
Not too late.
no, well, I looked at that. I thought that, yeah, no. But I like what I do now. I do a lot of volunteering. Uh, squash has made the Olympics after a million years, and I'm on the world squash board. And I come down here and help at clubs so the manager can go on and spend some time with his kids during the school holidays. And I suppose I'm back in my happy place really because I like giving. I think and that again is another uh, something of my upbringing. My parents were always calling housey and bingo for this raising money for the school, the sports teams, or doing whatever. And my dad used to always say, Susan, don't never forget where you come from and never forget the people that have helped you along the way. And so, yeah, I don't, I think I've got one big thing left in me. I'm not sure what that is. I don't like getting older. I think there's a lot of ageism in New Zealand. I think people are, I think it's quite tough for women in their 60s to to start something new or to do something else or to do whatever. Or I don't know if that's entirely true or that's just what I think. Um, my husband's retired and took a long time. And, we sit around each day and say, well, what are you going to do today? Don't ask me that. So yeah, I don't know. There has to be there's got to be, I don't have any grandchildren. I'm not even supposed to say that because they get sick of me talking about that. But my sons are, I've got 2 in London, 2 back home in Tauranga. All got lovely partners. So anyway, just wait and see what's next.
I have no doubt that you have more in you. I have I have no doubt that you are going to
Well,
continue to do
I've
wonderful.
got lots of views on the state of sport in New Zealand currently.
Can you we are just about out of time, but if you have another couple of minutes, I would love to hear some of them.
Oh, no, I just think it's time we reviewed our whole given what's happened in the last few months with the number of CEOs and the sort of things that have happened. I was on the review in 2000 it was John Graham was the chair, and it reviewed the whole, it was called the Hillary Commission, then it became Spark, and then it became Sport New Zealand. That was 25 years ago, there was some pretty and from there, the funding models were developed, and I think everything like a quarter of a century needs to have another look at it. I mean, particularly I think around women's participation.
Hmm.
But anyway, they won't come knocking on my door because I'm too outspoken and I'm too direct but I'm also very qualified. Um, but sometimes people just don't like to be told what's sitting in front of their face, do they?
Oh, that comment cuts me to my core. I have a dear friend, whom I'm not gonna name publicly here, but we have this conversation. She's a professional director, and we have that conversation all the time about this idea that sometimes, um, we raise things when we're on boards or when we're in governance positions or in leadership positions or whatever, and people don't actually always wanna look at it because it's hard and it makes them uncomfortable, and it means they have to look at their own failings or the places where they didn't stand up where they could have or should have, and, this thing of, like, being someone who's outspoken. Yes, on the one hand, there's some for those of us who are outspoken in that way, there's some tempering we have to do to maximize our effectiveness, but the world needs people like you speaking out.
Oh,
We need it.
I
We need it. We're so desperate for it. We're so desperate for it in so many ways. We have such a dearth of it across so many domains, and the more people who speak up for what they believe to be right, the better the world will be.
Well, like, this concerns me. I think it used to just be jobs for the boys. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know you from a bar of soap, but I assume that, you've probably experienced some of these things. And I've read a lot of Brené Brown stuff, especially around the vulnerability and whatever, and it sort of resonates a little bit, or a lot, I suppose. It should be, and I can't, don't think we should change that. And society, and particularly around women in leadership, makes you feel like we should change it. It's like, but I think it should be, imagine 12 people on the board just like me. We get a lot of shit done. Get
I would
stuff
love it. I would love it. Put all the Susans in charge.
done.
Fantastic. I'm
No,
voting for that.
no, 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 I'm not exaggerating. It's easy. Yeah. I take my hat off to
But
all those people that are involved, but yeah, it would
I
be good.
will say that the most gratifying boards I've been on have been boards where pretty much everyone around the board table is unafraid to disagree with each other and is unafraid to say, "Hey, I don't think we're going down the right track," and then who would respond to those kinds of comments with curiosity rather than defensiveness. Like when you have a group like that, your point. I didn't take your point as like how great you are and that everyone should be like you. I took your point as when you have people in those positions who are willing to actually look at what the core issues are and kind of open up all the wounds and take a look at where we want to go, then the effectiveness of that group can be so much more massive than a group that's just tasked with sticking with the status quo.
I mean, I'm on a board. It's an international board, actually. So, I have to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, get my meeting, whatever. And the chair is threatened by any challenge I might bring to the table.
Mm.
You know, even if I bring it, I mean, I usually bring them constructively and we start off with a little bit. Um, but if the gentleman brings up similar issues, it's incredibly different reaction. So we now, between us, have a good cop, bad cop. I say, well, I'm going to bring it up. You follow in behind and we'll get something done because, you know, so,
Effectiveness.
yeah, but it shouldn't have to be like that.
No, no, it
And
shouldn't.
why? I mean, I kept saying to myself, why do I have to keep changing? Why do I have
Mm.
to be the one that keeps changing all the time?
Can I just say something on that? So I have a dear friend, Chelsea Lane. She was the first female high performance director at the NBA. And she's a mentor of mine. And for a long time, we would talk regularly and, uh, you know, cry to her about how everything was difficult. And she would, sort of slap me around a little bit. And I remember one day I said to her, I was like, how come I have to be the Brene Brown brave one and say the hard thing and, like navigate my own emotions and stay calm and da, da, da. I was like, can't I just throw myself on the floor and bang my fists and feet and, throw a tantrum and, just like throw my toys out of the cot? And she said, you absolutely can. It might not go well for you. And it was the perfect thing I needed to hear, right? Because it seemed like you don't have to change in any way. And you might not get what you want.
Well, I think that's pretty much hit the nail on the head, really.
Mm,
You know,
mm.
I had a few of those moments actually.
Yep,
And then you think, wow, that's exactly why you didn't get what you wanted.
exactly.
Uh,
Susan, it has been such a pleasure to chat with you. We've gone over time. I could talk to you for hours, I am sure of it.
no
Um,
problem.
we've
Glad
gone
we
over time.
connected.
So glad. So glad. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. It's been an absolute delight.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening. I found this conversation with Susan incredibly moving, not just because of what she's achieved, but because of how honestly she reflects on who she is. I loved the conversation that we had about her parents and the way that she's parenting differently to the way her parents parented her. And of course, she's been massively successful. So it's really hard to know what to do as a parent. My observation on parenting is that it is the absolute hardest job in the world because you are making bets every single day and you have no idea whether those bets are going to pay off you won't know for like 30, 40 years whether those bets are going to pay off. It's just the worst job out there. So to all you parents, thank you so much for listening. You're doing a great job. I'm in your corner cheering you on. Everything will turn out great. A huge thanks to Celebrity Speakers and Zed for supporting this episode. If you want to book Dame Susan for a keynote and leave your audience beyond inspired, Celebrity Speakers are the ones to reach out to. Thanks again for listening. Please do let me know your feedback. You can reach me on hello@KailaKolbin.com. Thank you for liking, subscribing, following. I am so grateful, as always, for your offerings to the algorithm gods. Thanks again, and see you next week. Hunger and Heart is brought to you by the Crusaders Leadership Program. Whether you're coaching under fives or a professional team, we all want the same thing: to build a culture of trust, to get the best out of your people, and to grow players into leaders. The Crusaders Leadership Program lets you get up close and personal with some of the greatest rugby legends of all time. People like Sir Wayne Smith, the Professor, Sam Whitelock, Kieran Reid. You'll connect with a global group of ambitious, caring coaches from a range of codes and backgrounds. And most importantly, you'll gain skills and techniques to drive impact and outcomes for your team. The Crusaders Leadership Program is a 2-week high-intensity virtual experience. It is delivered exclusively online, accessible from anywhere. Hunger and Heart listeners get 10% off the full price of the program. Use the code HUNGER at checkout. You can find out more about the Crusaders Leadership Program at crusadersleadership.com. That's crusadersleadership.com. Hunger and Heart is created by BOMA and the entire BOMA team, including Tito Bernal, Rach Engel, Hannah Hudson, Johanna Coxon, and me, Kaila Kolbin. Thanks for listening.